Okay, we're going to start our unit on our introduction to genetics. And this guy sitting here looking at his pea plants is Gregor Mendel, considered the father of genetics. So just to give you a little bit of a background, in the past, people did not understand why certain traits were inherited. They guessed where things, where offspring may have received their traits. There were two theories at the time. One is the blending theory, that offspring were a straight mix of the parents, and others were a particulate theory, where traits are inherited as particles, or like each offspring received a piece of the parent. So before we go much further, let's talk about these words, acquired versus inherited. So acquired means that it's something that you actually get during your lifetime, versus inherited, which, you think about it, you don't have any control over it. It is what you are born with. So here's an example. If you have a child who has a scar, blue eyes, and a missing tooth, which statement best describes these traits? Are they all acquired? Did they happen throughout the lifetime? Are they all inherited, like you were born with a scar? Or is either trait acquired or inherited, or is it neither acquired nor inherited? If you guessed C, that answer is correct. So a scar is an example of an acquired trait. Just because your parent has a scar doesn't mean you'll have a scar. Your blue eyes, though, you do inherit from your parents, and your missing tooth is also acquired. So just we want to make sure we carefully use those terms. As we learn about genetics, you'll hear the term nature and nurture. Nature is referring to those inherited traits. Nurture is talking about how the environment that you may be raised in, or the environmental conditions, if it's a plant, might be the amount of light or the amount of water. So back to Gregor Mendel. He's known as the father of genetics. The genetics is the study of heredity, and heredity is the passing of traits from parents to offspring. So you'll notice these words in your vocabulary. Mendel worked with pea plants. Pea plants were easy to work with. He had a large garden. He was a monk. He lived in a monastery, which was common for scientists at the time. They were often of a religious order, and they were inquiring about the world. So he worked on pea plants, and pea plants have a lot of traits. So you'll see a few of them here on the slideshow, like the pod shape, the pea if it was round or wrinkled, or green or yellow peas, and the pod colors, and even the flower colors. So Mendel actually grew thousands of pea plants and kept very meticulous data. So here's another picture showing the comparison. He would always find that there seemed to be two traits. For example, seed shape, they were either round or wrinkled. And he started to get curious what would happen when different plants were actually going to reproduce. So just so you know about plants can self-fertilize. Plants have male and female parts. Pollen is the male, is the sperm of a plant, and then the female part releases the eggs. So plants can self-pollinate, or they can cross-pollinate. And you've probably heard of the saying, the birds and the bees, because birds and bees actually help move pollen from one plant to another. So Mendel decided to kind of control this, and he looked at just taking true breeding plants to cross them with another type of true breeding plant. So purple, he crossed it with white. When he did that, all of the offspring were purple. So he used some terminology that you're going to see in your vocabulary. For plants that were true breeding, he called them homozygous. For plants that were a combination of the parents of the true breeding plants, he called them heterozygous, or hybrids. So the other thing that Mendel learned in his research was that some traits are dominant over the others. For example, every time he crossed a tall and a short plant, all of the offspring were tall. So he started to figure that one was, and he used the term dominant over the other. So along the lines, what you'll start to see is that we'll use the capital letter T to represent the dominant trait, and we'll use a lowercase letter to represent the recessive trait. Mendel discovered that each trait was controlled by two factors, and the factors that determine your traits are on our chromosomes. And on those chromosomes, in different segments, there are genes that are located on those chromosomes. So we know this. We just finished talking about mitosis. We know that these genes are located on these chromosomes and that each cell is going to have copies of these chromosomes. So you have 2 copies of every gene, 23 pairs. And let's just say this is this is chromosome number 1, and this is chromosome number 1. These we call them homologous pairs. Homo means same. And this allele for purple flower and the allele for white flower means that these 2 chromosomes have different genes on them, but notice the genes are in the same location. So this word locus is talking about this location. So organisms have 2 different alleles for a trait. So we're just going to do a quick check, and this is a good time to pause the video and write some of these questions down in your notes, and then we will go over the answers. One second. So if you pause the video, and I'm going to go over the answers now, so if you haven't finished, you want to give yourself a chance. So the father of genetics is Gregor Mendel. Genetics is the study of heredity, which is how traits are passed from parent to offspring. Mendel studied what organism? The answer is peas. Number 4, if one trait covers up another one, we say that it is dominant. The one that is covered up is recessive. Number 5, a true breeding plant is one that can only produce plants like itself. And that is true. So as we wrap up for today, what I want to leave you with is Mendel's principles that some alleles can cover up or hide others, and the one that's expressed is dominant. So if you look at these cherries, the phenotype of this cherry is big A, or homozygous dominant. The yellow cherries, it's a recessive trait, and so that is little a. It's shown as homozygous recessive. Now, there could be a hybrid or a heterozygous, but it's going to be this recessive allele is going to be hidden by the dominant allele. When we start to use the vocabulary correctly, we use these words genotype to describe this capital letters, the 2 letters. So we actually use, any letter makes sense, but ones that are usually, like for example, this plant is tall and short, we use the capital T to represent the tall's dominant, the hybrid, and the recessive. And you can see the terminology here. Phenotype is going to be what it looks like. So instead of using 2 capital letters or capital and lowercase, you're going to just use descriptive terms like tall or short, green or yellow. That's where we're going to leave off for today, and you're going to have some practice problems to work through.